everyone, and welcome to this tutorial from Cape Town in South Africa. And in this video, I'm going to be showing you how to build a DALL-E clone, essentially. So an AI image generator that will take prompts and generate images for you. We're going to be generating lots of images based on this text prompt. And we're also going to add another feature that allows us to take an existing image and upload it and then create variations of that image from it. Okay, so really excited about this because we're going to be using the OpenAI API for this. So if you're interested in learning how to use it, this is the perfect tutorial for you. We're going to be building this in React for the front end with a Node.js backend so that we can keep our API keys safe. So what are we waiting for? Of course, if you don't have the fundamentals of React and Node.js down, please do try this out anyway and fill in your gaps of knowledge later on. I do have a course that covers all of this, so check out the link in the video description below if you wish. Right, so first off, I'm just going to start a new project. It's going to be a React project. So all I'm going to do is, because I'm on WebStorm, just click React. And what should we call this? I'm just going to call it React DALL-E clone. Okay, and I'm essentially going to use this command to spin up my project. So in WebStorm, I don't need to do anything. I just need to click create, and then that will spin up my React app. Now, if you're not using WebStorm, just go ahead. I'm just going to make this bigger and go to the directory of your choice. So for me, it's going to be WebStorm projects, and then do npx space. So it's two commands: create React app, so just like we saw, and then whatever you want to call your project. So you can do React DALL-E clone or whatever you want, and hit enter, and that will do exactly the same as what is happening here. Okay, and then you'd have to go into that project, so cd into this project and open it up. So that is just for those who are not using WebStorm. Okay, but I am, so I'm just going to continue and wait for all my files and configuration to populate in this directory for me so that I can spin up a React project. Okay, if this is a bit too much, or if you are new to React, then please do check out my full site developer course where we go into this in a lot more detail than I'm going into now. Of course, I'm just assuming that you have the fundamentals down for React, but if you don't, then no worries. Please watch along anyway and fill in the gaps of knowledge later on. So there we go, happy hacking, we are done. And if we look in here, we see all the files and folders are ready for me to use. I'm just going to clean up and delete the ones I don't need. So let's just go ahead and delete these because we're not going to write any tests. So delete that, delete the logo, delete anyway, delete. Let's go ahead and yes, we don't want the test file, so that can go. And I'm going to delete the app CSS file because there's not going to be much styling. I'm just going to do it all in one file. So now your index.js file, I'm just going to again delete this because we don't need it. I'm going to delete semicolons because I don't like using them. And there we go. So that is what your index.js file should look like at the moment. Let's get rid of everything in the index CSS and your app.js. Again, I'm just going to delete most of this like so. We don't have a logo and we don't import the app CSS file. I'm also going to change this to be a functional expression just because that is my personal preference. So this is what your app.js file should look like. This is what your index CSS file should look like, and this is what your index.js file should look like. You can change this to be JSX files, as essentially we are going to be using JSX. This is JSX, but that is totally up to you. I'm not going to because I just want to get the project done for you so we can learn how to use OpenAI, but it's up to you. So there we go. That is what we have at the moment. Let's carry on. So first off, I'm just going to style this up. Let's work on actually generating images first. So let's do it. So what I'm going to do is just essentially build a kind of input that looks kind of cool. And I'm going to do this by essentially creating a section. So we're going to have two sections. We're going to have this to be the search section. So I'm just going to give the class name of search section, just like so, and let's have another section, and there's going to be to show all our images. So I'm just going to give this the class name of, and let's go with image section, as our images are going to be spilled out into here. Now in the search section, I'm also going just to put a p element that says start with a detailed description And then I'm going to open up a span element that says surprise as well, if we want to be surprised with a prompt instead. So there we go. Or maybe let's just have surprise me. Okay, so that's what that is going to say. Let's also just pick this out. So I'm going to give this the class name of surprise, so we can pick it out, so we can style it surprise. I'm just going to put this on a new line for you like so. And also we're going to have an on click on here, but let's maybe leave that, or perhaps let's do it. Why not? Let's have some options to be surprised with. So I'm going to write surprise options just like so and make an array. And then in the surprise options, let's have a few commands that we can pass through. So I'm just going to have 3 strings in this array. A blue ostrich eating melon. Let's have a Matisse style shark on the telephone. I'm intrigued to see what that's going to look like. A pineapple sunbathing. I'm looking at the sun now, so I'm going to go with sunbathing on an island because I'm in Cape Town at the moment and I've got the most amazing view of the sea. So I guess that's where that has come from. Ostrich. Hopefully I haven't made any spelling mistakes. So we now have some surprise options. And what I want to do is on click of this, I want to essentially bring back one of these so we can populate it. But let's leave that for now. I just want to carry on building this out a little bit more first. So there we have our P element, that whole thing right here. It's going over 3 lines. And after our P element, I'm actually going to create a div. And it's going to hold our input as well as the button to generate new ones. So I'm going to give this the class name of input container, just like so. And in my input container, I'm going to have an input, which is going to take up the majority of the input container. But on the right of it, I'm also going to have a button that's going to say generate. And it's going to generate whatever images we want based on the prompts we give. So those are my 2 things that I'm going to put in here. Maybe let's also have a placeholder for this. So just so we know what kind, like some inspiration, I guess, for the prompt. Let's have an impressionist oil painting of a sunflower in a purple vase, ... Again, I'm just going to put this on a new line because I want you to be able to read everything. So that is one thing that we're going to have on the input. And the button, again, there's going to be an on click on here. But other than that, I think we are now done. We just need to style this up a little bit. So let's go ahead and first pick out the app. First off as well, I'm going to also just grab the whole body. So the whole body of the app that we are building. Let's make it a bit bigger. And I just want to get rid of any default margin and padding. So I'm just going to go with margin 0. Padding 0. That's actually very large. We don't need it that big. I'm also just going to make sure the whole body takes 100% of the viewport width and 100 of the viewport height. And then let's also give it a background color. I'm going to go with a slightly off-white. So FAFAFC is what I've chosen. You can kind of see the preview here. And I'm just going to make sure that all the text is also the same color. So this kind of gray. There we go. I'm also just going to make sure that everything, so star means everything in here is going to have the font family of sans serif. You can have a backup. I can't be bothered. But if you want, you can, of course, have like a few more here as backups of sans serif. But sans serif is a pretty stable one. I think all browsers are compatible with it. So great. So that is my body. One other thing that I'm going to do is actually say, so at the moment, let's start this up. I could just go ahead and click here and that will run the command npm run start for me. So this command right here. But if you are not in WebStorm, of course, you need to go into WebStorm projects again and find React DALI clone OpenAI. Okay, so just go ahead and do that, making sure to spell that correctly. And once you're in here, you will do npm run start to start up that project. Again, I don't have to. I'm just going to click here and that will open that up for me. So there we go. It's opening up on localhost 3000. And there we go. That is what it looks like. I'm going to inspect the page so we can view the console and see what's up. So this is what it looks like at the moment. Our elements are here. And if you move this down, you will see in the body, okay, we have the root and the app is injected into there. And then we've got the search section and the image section, which doesn't have anything in it at the moment. But let's style these up a little bit more. So I'm just going to minimize that and keep that running. And now let's get the search section, just like so. Just going to minimize that. And the search section, I'm going to make sure that the width is 100%. And then I'm going to center everything in there. So I'm going to initialize flexbox. And now I'm going to do flex direction to make sure that everything stacks on top of each other. So like a column. And I'm going to center everything using justify content center. So at the moment, that is my search section. Everything is centered from the top to bottom. And now what I'm also going to do is get the parent, so the app, and make sure that these two are kind of not going all the way to the sides. I actually want the app to be only 90 of the viewport width. So let's grab the app itself. So the element with the class of app, and I'm going to assign the width of 90 viewport width to it. Okay. And now just center it in the body. So let's grab the body again and use display flex, justify content, center. So now that should be centered. So great. That is what it looks like at the moment. Let's get to styling the span with the class of surprise me next. So once again, I'm just going to find the element with the class of surprise, because that was the class we applied to that. And I'm just going to make sure that the background color is a color that I have picked out previously. So there we go. I'm going to make sure that the font is black. I'm also just going to round it off so it looks more like a pill by giving it 5 pixels border radius. So border radius. I'm going to make the font weight a lot heavier. So I'm going to pass through 600 and let's give it a padding. So I'm going to pad it out 4 pixels from the top and bottom and 12 pixels from the left and right. So that is a shorthand to do that. So at the moment, it looks like this. And I'm also just going to apply some margin to space it out. So I'm just going to use margin 0 on the top, 0 on the right, but 2 pixels at the bottom and 5 pixels on the left. So that is what it looks like at the moment. This is looking pretty good. Now let's style the input container. So what I'm going to do is let's go back in here and have a look at this. Let's grab the input container. So there we go, the element with the class name of input container. And I'm going to say that I want the width of it to be 100% of the parent that it's in. So the search container. Let's use display flex to initialize flexbox. And that just means that anything in the input container, so the input itself and the button will be next to each other. And now I just want to round it off. So give the whole thing a border radius of 6 pixels. However, it does have an input inside and a button inside. If those two elements go over the outline of the input container, I want anything that goes over to be hidden. So I'm going to do overflow hidden. So that just means that, as you will see here, the little corners have been cut off because they go outside the input container itself. So here's my input container. And as you will see, that has been cut off. Now let's style the input and the generate button next. So let's do it. One last thing though is I am going to add a box shadow to here. I'm going to go RGBA for transparency. I'm going to go 0, 0, 82 as the color, and then 0.15 opacity, and I'm going to apply 0 on the x-axis, 2 pixels on the y-axis, 4 pixels blur, and then 0 spread, so we can just leave that, and this cool box shadow will be applied. Now let's actually style the input. So let's grab the input. We can say that it's an input that lives inside the input container, just in case we want to add different inputs later. And I'm just going to go with border none. Let's give a padding from the top 13 pixels and from each side 14 pixels, making sure to spell padding correctly. And then the box sizing, I want this to happen on the inside, so I'm going to use border box. And the font size as well, I'm going to apply as 13 pixels, or maybe let's make it bigger, 15 pixels, with the outline of the actual input being none as well. So this just means that, let's just comment this out for now. This just means that at the moment you can see a blue outline. I want to get rid of that if I interact with it, which means I can add outline none. Let's just make sure we spell outline correctly for that to be applied. So now no blue line will be applied. Great. So that is my input. The other thing I need to change is the width of it. I want to be 90% of the parent, which is the input container. And let's just change the font weight of this to be 200 as well. So there we go. So if this is width 90, let's make the button that lives inside the input container a width of, you guessed it, a width of 10. And let's style it up as well. So at the moment it will look like this, but let's style it up further so it looks less horrible. So one other thing, however, is on the input itself. I'm just going to change the placeholder text. So if you ever want to change the placeholder text, you can. So at the moment, obviously, let's just click off this. It looks like that. We can go further and just change the color to be a bit lighter. So I've gone ahead and picked out this color like so. And let's make the font weight, well, 200. I think that's already applied, but it should just look like this now. Wonderful. Okay, so we have the button. I'm also going to just change the border of it to be none. Let's change it to have a border on the left though. So we're going to override that none and give it a border left of 1 pixels. The color that's kind of the same as the color, well, exactly the same as the text placeholder color, and make it solid. The background color of the button, I want it to be white. Let's give it a color. So the text should be this color. Let's make it bold. So let's give it a font weight of, well, you can go bold or you can choose an exact font weight. That's up to you. And I'm going to make sure that it's obvious to someone that we can click on it by adding cursor pointer. So if we go over it, my cursor changes. Okay, great. So that is cool. And let's just change that if the button is active. So let's grab all of this and say that if the button is active, I just want to, maybe let's just change the background color. So background color, and let's go with this kind of color like so. So if we click on it, it just does that. But this is good so far. I'm really enjoying it. Okay, some generic stuff I'm going to add is perhaps let's just change all the P elements in here to have a font weight that is applied as like a default. So font weight, I'm going to go with 200, and let's also change the font size to be 14 pixels. So that is just going to be applied a little bit to all of the fonts as a default. Wonderful. Okay. So I think this looks looking good for now. Let's carry on. So I think it's now time to actually generate an image so that we can see all the images showing up. So let's do that next. For this, I'm actually going to build out a backend. So in here, I'm just going to create a new file. So on the same level as the package JSON, I'm going to get a file and call it server.js. And our server is essentially going to go on here. So there we go. That is our file. There is where it lives. Just make sure that it's not in the source directory. It's outside. Great. So let's minimize that. Now what's going to go in my server.js file? Well, let's set it up. We're going to have to define a port. So I'm going to go with port 8000. We're then going to have to require some packages. So const express equals, and then I'm going to get the package express. So I'm going to do require express as well as a bunch of other packages. So maybe now is a good time to actually install those packages. So if you get up your terminal, making sure that you're in the correct project, just do npm I, and we're going to install the package Express. We're also going to install cause. So Express is going to help us with routing. Cause is going to help us with error messages that we get from cause. We're going to use the .env file. So we need the .env package for this in order to hide our secret variables so we don't upload them onto GitHub or anything like that. And we're of course going to use the OpenAI package that will help us communicate with OpenAI better, as well as a package called FS and Multer, which will help us deal with actually storing images into our project, but we'll come onto that later. For those of you who need more of an explainer into these packages and what we're doing here, please do check out my course, where again, I go into this in a lot more detail. There's just not enough time for now, and it really is the kind of fundamentals of working with Express and Node.js. So I'm going to hit enter for that to do its thing, and essentially you should see those dependencies or those packages show up here along with the version we are using. So if your version is different for any reason, please go ahead and change that and make sure that they're the same if you're watching this in the future as this video, because something might not work, and then just rerun it, so reinstall them again if you've already changed the package. So if I change the package here to 3, save that file and run npm, that is the version that will get installed. But of course, we don't want that. We want the latest versions. So great. We have now installed those packages. Now I'm going to write a script in order to start our backend. So here is our front end, but I'm going to change it to be start front end. So I'm just going to make that a bit bigger for you. We're also going to have to install one more package, which is nodamon, which is going to listen out to constant changes on our backend. So please go ahead and install that package, which means we can now use it to start our backend and listen out to constant changes. So now I'm just going to do start backend. And I'm going to do nodamon, and nodamon listen out for constant changes. And then I'm going to say on which file. I'm going to say on the server.js file. So server.js. So that's what that piece of code has done. And there's the nodamon package. So save that file. And now I'm actually going to stop this from running because I'm going to run my front end from here. So I'm going to do npm run start front end this time, npm run start front end, and hit enter. So now our front end is running again. And you will see that is running, and I'm going to create a new tab, making sure again that I'm in the same project, and do npm run, this time start backend, and hit enter. So there we go. Now we have our backend running and our front end running. So now back in here, of course, we need the package Express. Next, I'm also going to require the package core. So let's do require and then the package of course. And now I'm going to get Express because essentially I've got the package and I've saved it under this const. And now I need to release all of that wonderfulness. So whoop, that's me releasing it. And now we need to store all that wonderfulness under something else. So I've gone with app, which means we can now use all of Express's wonderfulness by using app. And now app will have lots of cool methods and properties attached to it. One of them being app use, which will allow us to grab the cause package and once again release all of its wonderfulness so we can use it in this project. Okay, so hopefully I've explained that well. The other thing we need to do is actually use app use, and we're going to get Express and release JSON. So use the method of JSON on it. So we can actually work with JSON where we're sending JSON from the front end of our project to the back end of our project. If you don't have this, you won't be able to send stuff from the front end to the back end, specifically JSON. So great. The other thing we need to do is require the package .env, and this will allow us to essentially create .env files to store our variables secretly, and we're going to have to do that because we're going to store our OpenAI API key. Cool. So I think that should be it for now. We do have a few more to use, but I think let's cross that path when it gets to it. So now I can, of course, use app, and it will come with a cool method called listen, which will allow us to listen out to a port. So that is one thing we're going to have to pass through. And the second thing is a callback, and we're just going to console log your server is running on port and then the port number. Okay, so let's check it out. So now if I look at my terminal, that shows up. And if I make any changes here, it will rerun it. So I just saved the project again and just rerun it. So that's what nodamon does. Nodamon essentially listens out for constant changes on our backend. Cool. So now that we have done that, let's get to using the OpenAI API. So all I am going to do is essentially go to the OpenAI documentation. Let's go to developers. Let's go to API reference. Of course, making sure that you are signed in, right? So I hope you're signed in. And all I'm going to do is essentially, we're going to create images first. So this is going to help us. We're going to use the Node.js for this. And this is the endpoint we're going to use to create images. We want to create 10 images. So 10 is a number we can pass through. We can pass through the number of images to generate. We can get up to 10. So let's go get to it. The other thing we're going to pass through is the size of the image. It has to be one of these three. And then as a default response, we're going to get a URL to the image. That's fine. We're not going to pass that through. In fact, we're just going to pass through the prompt, which is required, the amount of images we want to get and the size of the image. So that's what we're going to do. It's already kind of done for us here. So all I'm going to do is take all of this. Again, make sure you are logged in because we are going to have to get our API key from here. But essentially, here's the URL you need to be at. Images, create image, and then under create image, make sure you're on Node.js and literally just copy all this code. And then we're just going to write a route. So what's the route going to be? I think if we're going to use post, let's say that if we go to / images, you can go to whatever you want, right? That's up to you. We're going to essentially do this. Okay, great. Of course, we have to pass through a request and response. That is just part of the syntax for using express routes. And we have to make this an async function as we are using the await keyword here. And as we know, to use the await keyword, we have to make it in an async function because we need to await for this to come back. So again, if you don't know much about async JavaScript, that is in my course, please do check it out. I'm not going to go into it in too much detail here as I'm assuming you already have that knowledge. Cool. So that is my post route at the moment. What we are actually going to do is move all of this out so we can reuse it. So I'm just going to paste it up here. And of course, we are going to have an API key. I'm just going to get rid of that. You know, we just need an API key. You can name it whatever you want again. So at the moment, this should be the only thing that's in our express route. And I'm going to stick it in a try and catch. So we're going to try this and we're going to catch any errors. And if there are errors, we're just going to console error the error, right? So that is looking good. Of course, we don't really want this. We want to send this from the front end, but we will do that when it comes to the right time. And once we get the response, all I'm going to do is use res send and then send the response data. I'll show you why. Let's just console log the data to see what comes back. Okay, so actually let's just console log the response, sorry. But if you actually look in here, you can kind of see the response. Okay, we get the response data, and this was the objects that comes back, and we just want to get the data, which is this array, which holds objects, which have URLs in them. But I will show you. So cool, that is what happens when we essentially make a post request to localhost localhost 8000 / images. But don't believe me, I'm going to show you. So let's do it. On the front end, what I'm going to do is actually add an on click to here. So on click, what do I want to happen? Well, on click, I'm just going to get the images, right? So let's define get images. I'm going to do so up here. So const get images is what I am going to call this function. And once again, I'm going to use try and catch. I'm going to catch any errors, and we're just going to console error the errors that come back. And then in here, I'm going to, again, use await, because the fetch API essentially is an async function. So we need to await for whatever comes back to us. And we're going to save the response. So we're going to save the response, and we're using the await keyword here, which means this needs to be an async function, as await cannot live in a function that is not async. And like I said, we're going to go to HTTP localhost, as we defined 8000 / images. So that is the route that we made. We could have called it whatever. If you change it here, then of course you need to change it here too. And then we're just going to pass through some options. So let's define those options. const options, just like so. And we're going to pass through the method. It's a post method, right? Because it's a post method here. We're going to send some JSON, which we're going to replace here. So that is why it's a post request. And along with the method, I'm just going to pass through the body. It's going to be an object, okay, that's going to send a message, which is essentially going to be the value of our input, right? So at the moment, I'm just going to go with blah, make sure that is inside the object. I'm going to have to wrap this in JSON stringify in order to send this whole object as JSON. Okay, great. And outside of this, we also need to pass through some headers just to tell this that we are working with JSON. So I'm going to do content type and then application JSON. So just like so. Cool. And once we get that response, I'm just going to get its JSON, but this is also an async method, so we have to await it, and we have to await the response. Let's say this as maybe data, and there we go. And I'm just going to console log the data. So that's a lot. Let's see if it works. Of course, we aren't passing anything through. We're not even passing blur to the backend. Well, technically we are, but that's not what we're sending to the API. A cute baby sea otter is what we're sending to the API. So let's do it. Let's try this out. I'm just going to go back to my project. Let's get up our console log. And then let's also not forget to get our API key. So I'm going to show you where to get that. It's just under here. We're going to view the API keys and we can create a new one. So I've just gone ahead and created that. Of course, this will not be accessible to you. I will delete this. So don't think you can go and use mine and use all my free credits. But that is how you'd create one, okay? Just go to account API keys and create a new key, copy it. And then I'm just going to, for now, paste it here. Or in fact, let's just make the env file. I'm just going to create a new file. Let's call it .env and add. And then I'm going to define API key equals and then put that string. We don't need to put it in quotations as a string is implied. And it just means I can now use process env thanks to this piece of code right here in order to look into my env file and find API key. So we find it and get its value. So that's all I've done. Let's carry on. So yes, now if I go ahead and click generate, we should be able to communicate with our API. And we're just going to pass through a cute baby sea otter, and then we should get back 2 images for us. So if we look in the terminal, this is the whole response. However, if we go .data, like I said, we're going into the data object. Let's try again. I'm just going to click generate again and let's have a look. So we're waiting for changes. We'll wait a little bit longer. And there we go. So we've got the data, and here's our array of 2 URLs. And they should be of 2 cute baby otters. Let's have a look. Okay, so here is one. It is a cute baby otter. Wonderful. So that is working, and that's what we are sending back to the front end so that we can use it here. So we can now map these 2 images onto here. So let's do that next. Back on the front end, let's actually just make this a bit smaller now, or actually just get rid of that completely. I'm going to use state. So let's go ahead and import the use state hook, import use state from React so we can save stuff to the state of this component. So I'm going to do const. Let's maybe save the, what should we call this? I guess images, right? That's what they are. Images, set images, use state. And let's start off with null. And now once we get back that data, so the response is data, which is what we're console logging out here. So it's an array of 2 objects. I'm going to use set images to just set that data, right? So now we're going to have images. And we can now get the images to show up. So all I'm going to do is in the image section, let's open this up. And then if essentially images exist, I want to map each image, we're going to have to get the index as well, because we're going to have to essentially map that onto a key. So let's get each image and let's get an index. We're not really going to use this. I'm just going to underscore it. And then I am going to create an image element. Like I said, this is very simple. So, if you want to build this out and create components, please do. This is just to get us used to using the OpenAI API. Let's go ahead and add in key. So I'm going to use index. And now I'm going to add the source. And the source of this is going to be the image. Well, if we look at what's coming back to us, here is my first item. It's an object. So we're going to use dot notation to get the URL. So I'm going to do .url, and as some alternative text, I'm just going to do generated image of, and then I guess whatever my prompt was, right? So actually what we can do is just put in the value. So the value is going to be my prompt, which of course we haven't written yet, but I think that's kind of a cool way to do it, right? Because we need this for the visually impaired. So now, maybe let's just get the value. So I'm just going to save the value of the input up here to const value set value. And then let's do use state null to start off with. However, we can set the value on the input change. So on change of this, I'm just going to get the event and then set value e target value. So that is how you would change the value of the input. We can also display it in here just by passing through the value. Okay, so now if we have a look, in fact, I'm just going to console log this out too. Up here, console log value. Right, so at the moment value is null, but if I change this, it changes here, and that's what we can send over when we make a request. Cool. So we are saving the value and then we're just showing it here. We're also going to save it here of the generated image once we have the images back. So now that we are mapping that on, let's have a look. So let's have a look here. Why is it shouting at us? Okay, so we want to essentially map those images, right, onto images, and that's what we are doing. However, let's also make sure that each image that lives inside the element of the images section. So let's grab the images section again. Okay, and down here, I'm going to grab the image section and just make sure that its width does span 100% of the parent. I'm also just going to make sure that everything wraps over each other. So I'm going to initialize Flexbox for that. I'm also then going to make sure that it wraps over, right? So I'm going to do flex wrap wrap. And then I'm also going to align items stretch, so they stretch out, and I'm going to justify content space between so that the images kind of stretch. Okay, but of course we won't really be able to see anything until we get the images. So let's just say that any image that lives inside the image section is going to, let's give each one a margin of 1 pixel, so they're spaced out from each other. Let's also give them a min width of 250 pixels, but then also a max width of, let's say 33% of the parent. I'm also going to use flex grow to make sure that they stretch out. Okay, cool. What I'm also going to do, so at the moment we really won't see much. Let's maybe generate this again and wait for those little otters to come back. So let's wait, even though it'll be hard to see with 2. So maybe let's just change the amount that come back. Sorry about that. Let's just change it to 10 baby otters. And let's try it again. So generate. Okay, and now we're going to have 10. We're going to see what it looks like when there's lots of images populating our app. Of course, it does take a while for this API to do its thing. We are working with images as well, so it will take some time in order for that to show up. Okay, so there we go. Here's our 10 images, and here's our 10 baby otters. How cute is that? We should probably space it out from the top, but we will deal with that later. I just want to show you that this is what it looks like. And then we can even add media queries. So I can add a media query. Let's go back here. And I'm just going to do at media max width. Let's go with 556 pixels. And then I'm just going to say that any image that lives inside the image section is actually just going to have a max width of 100%. So it's going to essentially take up the whole space if I get to a certain point. Cool, right? Okay. What else do I want to do? Maybe let's also get the search section. So search section and assign it a height, I don't know, 300 pixels, whatever you think will look nice. So I think that looks okay. We can make it smaller. Like, honestly, this is just styling that you can get way too wrapped up in when we just want to learn how to use the OpenAI. But, you know, I think that looks better. So now let's actually get to passing the value through so we don't just get otters. I'm going to show you how to do that next. So let's go back to the app. We are setting the value here, right? So now all I'm going to do is get that value and replace it with blur. So there we go, making sure that is code. And that now that means that's going to be passed over with our option. So that on the server, that gets sent over. And it's part of the body, right? So if we look at here, it's going to be part of the request body message. And this is an object, so we use dot notation. So I can just go with using request body message to get whatever that value is. So this right here. Make sure to wrap it in JSON stringify and make sure that is here in order for that to work. But essentially now let's check this out. So let's go back here. What should we do this time? I'm just going to refresh this for now. Let's go with, or let's do surprise me, right? Let's hook up the surprise me. So let's go back here and on click of the surprise me. So on click, I'm going to write a function called surprise me and let's define it. So let's grab this const surprise me equals, and then all I'm going to do is essentially set the value. So set value to be, well, I'm going to get the surprise me options, or let's maybe, yeah, let's get the const random value from the array. I'm going to get the surprise options and I'm going to pass through into them to get back a random number from 0 to 2, as that is index 0, 1, and 2. And to do that, I'm going to essentially use math random and call it, but multiply it by the surprise options length. Okay, and then round that number down, because that will give, this gives me back a random number from 0 to just under 1. And if I multiply it by the length, it would be from 0 to just under 3. But of course, 3 doesn't exist. We want to round it down to 2. So that's why I pass it through math. Sure. Okay, so that is how you would get a random value. And we just pass it through into set value. So now if I click on here, how cool is that? Let's go with a Matisse style shark on a telephone and generate and wait for that to do its thing. And we get our 10 sharks. This is cool. And here they are. Here are 10 randomly generated sharks. I love them. They're pretty awesome. Of course, it will take a while for the images to download, but I mean, this is like super arty and I'm really into it. Of course, we can write our own thing. So we can do a cool ice cream and generate. You will see how that value is updating every time we type it, but that value will only be sent once we hit generate as well. So that is something that you should know. Okay, and then that's replacing the images here of cool ice creams. Okay, of course, we have to wait a little bit for that to completely be replaced. One thing we can do is when we click the surprise me, we actually set the images to be null first, as well as I think when we get the images again, let's just reset that. And actually also, let's say that if value equals null, right? So if we just click it, but there's no value, then we're going to set an error message. And that error message is going to say error must have a search term, right? Okay, and then we're going to return out of this because we don't want to do anything else. So let's set error messages, const error set error use state. We're going to have a null to start. I'm going to set the error. And if we do have an error, I'm just going to display it down here. I'm actually just going to maybe display it, I think, let's go with just outside of the input container down here. I'm just going to show the error if one exists. So maybe let's wrap it if error exists, then we show the p element with the error. So no p element exists unless there's an error present. Okay, so now let's check it out. A cool hat and generate and wait for that to do its thing. And we get some cool hats. And if we click surprise me, it'll clear those images so that we can start fresh and we can generate our surprise me prompt. Okay. And again, same if we want to remove this, it's some more cool hats and generate. It will clear those images so we can start fresh. So that is a much better approach. Right, so generate 10 images. They look pretty cool. I think now I'm really excited to show you this next part as this took me a while to figure out. So I'm excited to share my result with you. And it's all about generating variations of an image that already exists. So this was interesting because we're going to have to figure out how to upload existing images onto here, not just write prompts, and use the images, create image variation endpoint for this part. So let's do it. So first off, I'm just going to go ahead and add an input that will allow us to do this. So I'm going to show you how I would personally solve this part. So this is the input. We don't want to do it in the input container. Let's perhaps do it outside of the input container. So what I'm going to do is actually create a p element outside of the input container. So just make sure that is finished here. And here, what I'm going to do, maybe let's just format this a little bit better while we are at it. Okay, so there we go. I'm going to use a p element and I'm just going to write or let's actually also give this a class name so we can pick it out. I'm going to give the class name of extra info. So just like that, we're going to have or, and then I'm going to actually create a span. But this span, so maybe let's put this on a new line. This span is going to hold a bunch of stuff. It's going to hold a label. Okay, and the label is going to say upload an image. Okay, it's all part of one sentence. So that's going to say upload an image, and this label is for. So let's use HTML4. This is for something with the ID of files. So it's going to be an input, okay, with the ID of files. So that's how you would link them up. So if we click on the label, it will affect this input. I'm going to show you what I mean. And here, this is going to have files, but it's also going to have an accept, and it's going to accept all types of image. So I'm just going to go with image like this. And it's going to take the type of file. So at the moment, if I look at this, it will look like that. Or upload an image, but I want to hide this part, okay? And what I want to happen is if I click on upload an image, then it chooses an image for me without actually showing this part. So let's add hidden to this to hide that. Okay. So or upload an image, and then I'm just going to put some more text, and that is going to say to edit. Okay, so there we go. Maybe it just needs a space to edit here. So I'm going to put a space there, put a space there, ID match, otherwise that will not work. And it just means that now if I go ahead and click on here, that should open that up, okay? And now what I'm going to do is actually grab this class of extra info, and I'm just going to make sure that the text is centered. So extra info, and then I'm going to go with text align center. So there we go. That is now done. However, why is this not centered? Let's have a look back here. Class name. And wonderful. So now we can upload new images. This is great. Part one is kind of done. Now let's move on. So I'm going to go back in here And what do I want to do? Well, if we click on this, so if we click on this whole thing, I want a modal to pop up and a bunch of other stuff. So I'm going to do on change of this input. So if we select something from the files, make sure to have type file on this input in order for this input to look the way it does. I'm going to upload an image so we can view it. So let's define upload image. So I'm going to maybe do so here. So let's get rid of that. Const upload image equals, and then we're going to get whatever. So we're going to pass to E, because we're going to get the E target file. So the files we uploaded. So if I just console log E target files, I'm going to show you what happens. So back in here, let's upload this test image. Okay, this is what comes back. And we just want to get that first item. So it's a file called test.png. So there it is. So we could just go into this and get the first item from it because we just want one. So there will always just be one because we chose to get a singular file. So there we go. So now that we have that file, what I want to do is create a form. So we can send over the whole form. So I'm going to do const form data equals, and I'm going to create a new form data constructor. So now to append to this existing form data, I'm going to use append, and we are going to essentially append a file, so the property file, along with the eTarget file. So we're sending that over with the form data. We need to send that over with the form data in order for this to work. You can, of course, send other stuff too. That is totally up to you. Then what I'm going to do is set the selected image. So set selected image, and I'm just going to pass through this so we know what the selected image is. And of course, we need to save that to state. So let's do const selected image, set selected image, and then we're going to use state null because it's going to be nothing at first. We are just essentially storing whatever image we select to this component. Okay, great. And now all I'm going to do is just send that image to my backend. So what I am going to do is use try and catch to catch any errors. And I'm going to use the await fetch. So we need to make this an async function. And we're going to define a route on the backend. So once again, let's do app. It's going to be a post, and we're going to post to, let's go to upload. And essentially what's going to happen here is I'm literally just going to send this image here and save it to my server. So it's essentially going to show up here. Okay, or we can put it in the public folder. We can put it wherever. That is up to us. So let's also pass through the request and the response. And what else do we need to pass through from the front end? So yes, let's go ahead and use this. However, we have defined this endpoint as upload this time. And let's also pass through the options. So just as above. And let's define our options. So, whoops, this is meant to be up here, and we're just going to console error. So let's define our options. As I said, const options equals, and it's going to be an object. Of course, we have to wait for this response. And the options that we're going to pass through, well, we're going to pass through the method, which is a post method. We're also going to pass through the body, which is just going to be our form data that we have, and we appended the file to. And then I'm just going to console log the response so we can see it. But of course, we need to get that response first and get it to JSON. Call it and await this. And let's save this as data. Okay, so then we just console log the data again. Cool. So let's see if we can send that image to the server. And on the server, there's a few things we need to do. We're actually going to now have to require those packages. So let's move that up here. And then up here, I'm going to do const fs require fs. We're also going to require a package called multer, which is going to help us save those files. So require multer. So once we have those two, we are now ready to start essentially adding files to our repository by sending them to our backend. So all I'm going to do, I did get this code from the documentation. So we're going to use upload, and upload we're going to define up here. So maybe actually let's define it here where we define a bunch of other stuff. I'm just going to make this smaller for now. I'm going to do const upload equals, I'm going to use multer, and we're just going to pass through storage, and storage we're going to also define, and we're going to be working with single files, right? So we'll do file single. Okay, so let's define storage now, const storage, and here's where we're going to essentially define where we want to store those files. So multer disk storage, I'm going to open this up, I'm going to pass through an object, I'm going to define the destination. The destination here is the syntax again. So again, I've just taken this from the documentation. We're going to do CB, and then we're going to save it to the public directory in this project. So they're going to be saved in here. Okay, so that's what I've written. If you want to just be saved, you know, like in the root of your project, you could do this, right? So that is what you can do as well. So I've just defined where I want to save these files. Next, I'm also going to define how I want the file name to look. So again, I could do request file CB. And now I'm going to do CB null, and then I'm just going to use today's date and call it. So I get today's date, plus I'm going to use this little line, this dash, plus the original file name. So file original name. Okay, because if we console log file here, you will see the whole file object. So console log file, I'm going to show you what this looks like. Let's go ahead and just put in the string of file as well so you can see a bit better. So I believe that's it. Here are the things you will need. So those two right here. So now we can use upload that we defined up there. And again, request, response, and let's pass through errors. And this code I literally just got from the documentation. So if there's an error, just send back the errors. Otherwise, I'm just going to console log the request file. Okay, great. So now let's check it out. I'm going to go back here and let's upload an image. I'm going to just go with this test or teast. Okay, so that's the file, and that should have triggered my request. So if I look in here and let's look at the terminal. Okay, I believe that should have worked. I can see that here's the date, right? And here's the dash, and here's my original file name. So that has worked. That's the whole file. And essentially I did file.original name to get the original name, right? So that's what we did, file original name. So I've console-logged the file, I've looked in the object and got the file name and appended it with the date now to create, let's look in public, this file right here. So how cool is that? We've just saved a PNG file into our project. Okay, really cool. And like I said, if I just did this and then let's try it again. So let's upload, maybe let's just pick the same file, teast.com.png. And now if we look in here and let's just wait a bit, ta-da, you will see that file is now in here, not in the public directory. But I do want them to be saved in the public directory, so I'm just going to put that back. So I'm just going to delete these for now so we can carry on. But essentially, we are saving files into our project. How cool is that? Wonderful. So something I didn't say, and this is kind of important, is that the images must be a certain size. So the three sizes that we saw at the beginning, one was 256 by 256. So make sure your image is that size in order for it to work correctly, or the other two that you saw. Now, of course, this is a very basic tutorial on how to use the OpenAI API. It would be cool for you to be able to crop images in here, but it's outside of the scope of this project. So just make sure to upload the correct files if you want to build this out correctly. But we compute a few stoppers. So for example, let's put out a modal that only allows you to upload certain size images next. So again, I just did that, and here is my image. It's got the date as well as what I call the image, which is 256 by 256 PNG, which is the size of that image. So we are saving these images back here. The next thing we need to do is actually send them over to our backend. But before we do that, I actually want to build a modal first so we can see the image and its preview. So what I'm going to do is in the source directory, I'm going to create a new directory called components, and we're going to build a modal. So components, and in here I'm going to create a new file. I'm going to call it modal.js, and we are just going to build out that component. Okay, so we're going to add that. So let's do it. I'm going to do const modal equals, and then we're going to return some JSX. So at the moment, it's going to be a div, and we're going to export default modal. So just like that. Okay. And what do we want our modal to look like? Well, I'm just going to give this the class name of modal, like so. And in here, I'm going to have a div, and we're going to actually use state in order to open and close the modal. So let's import use state from React, because we're going to have to save the, I guess a few things. Well, we're going to have to save any error messages. So let's just do error, set error. These errors are contained to this component, unlike on the app. Use state, we're going to start off with null. So just like so. And actually, do we want to control? Well, I'd actually like to control a few more things based on whether the modal is open or not on the app. So we're going to pass through the set modal from the app itself. So let's go ahead and do that. Const modal open set modal open use state, and we're going to start off with being false, of course, as it is not open. So cool. I think maybe let's start off with just importing this modal. So import modal from components modal. So now I can just use that modal down here. And where shall we put it? I guess it doesn't really matter too much because we're going to overlay it with an overlay. So by that, I mean, I'm going to create a div. And in here, I'm just going to put in the modal like so. And I'm going to give this the class name of overlay. But I only want to show this if open modal is true. So we're going to wrap all of that in open modal. So, sorry, modal open, it was not open modal. So modal open. And I'm just going to hard this to be true for now so we can see what it looks like. So at the moment, of course, it doesn't look like anything because we haven't styled up the modal. So let's do that next. So I'm going to go back in here. And what else do we want in our modal? Well, I'm just going to have a div that says X so we can close it by the X. And on click of this, I essentially just want to close this modal. So I'm going to close modal. I'm going to define the function here. So let's do const close modal equals. I want a few things to happen though. And what I want to happen is I want to use set modal to be false. So set modal open, sorry, to be false, right? Which means we need to pass that through. So let's go back here. I'm going to use set modal open. I'm going to pass it through into the modal so we can use it, which means we need to destructure that prop here, destructure it so we can use it there. One other thing I want to do is set selected image to null as well, right? Because if we have a selected image, we don't want any more if we close the modal. So that is something else that we're going to have to pass through into the modal here. So set selected image, and then let's destructure it so we can use it there. Great. So that is what happens if we click on the X. Next, I'm going to have a div, and this is going to be for my image. So I'm just going to use the image element, and let's give this the class name of image container, just like so. Okay. And the image container is going to hold our image, which should only really show if a selected image exists. So selected image exists, then we want to show this, right? And as the source of this, we want to get that selected image and show it. However, so selected image, not set selected image. There's a few things we need to do. First off, we need to pass this through into the modal, right? So whatever we set here as a selected image, we are passing through into the modal. And now we need to destructure it here. So actually, if I console log what this looks like, our selected image, and what is wrong here. So we need to wrap this. Okay, so selected image exists, then we show the image with the selected image as well as some alternative text. Let's go with uploaded image. However, it will not work because, so let's go ahead and do this. Let's go with this image right here, open. Our selected image will look like this because at the moment it looks like an object like this. We need to pass it through URL. I'm going to show you URL, create object URL, and then pass that through. Okay, so we're passing that whole thing into here. So now we can see it. And great. So once again, let's upload an image. And then here is our modal. Let's also put in a button so that we can generate from that selected image. So after the image container, I'm going to just put a button that says generate. Okay, and let's style this up. So first off, what I'm going to do is just grab the, well, actually, let's grab the overlay first. So let's grab the class name of overlay just down here. And I'm going to position this. So I'm going to give this position absolute, top 0, left 0. I'm going to make it take up the whole width, so 100 viewport width, and the whole height, so 100 viewport height, and give it a background color. A background color that is transparent, so we can still kind of see everything behind it. So let's go with black and 0.15 opacity. So that is what it's going to look like. I'm also going to make sure we can't scroll by giving overflow hidden. Okay, so there we go. That is what it looks like at the moment. And we can't scroll thanks to overflow hidden. Next, I'm just going to center everything. So first off, I think let's initialize flexbox. Now I'm going to use justify content center and align items center as well. Okay, so there we go. And the last thing I'm going to do is just make sure it's in front of everything by giving it Z index of 10. Okay, just making sure that it's 100% in front of everything. So that is what it looks like. And if we close it here, it shuts the modal. Let's try again. Let's open up a new image. Okay, that does not work. I wonder why. Let's just refresh. Close that. We are overriding this. So let's make this back to be false again. So we start off with the modal being closed. So let's go back to here and scroll down. As soon as we save that form data, we're also going to set modal open to be true. Okay, great. So let's try it again. Upload. Amazing. And now let's style this up a little bit further. So all I'm going to do is now back on the index CSS after the overlay, I'm going to get the element with the class of modal. I'm going to position it relative. I'm also going to make sure that the Z index is the highest. So let's just go with 100 to be safe. Let's make the background color white. And now I'm going to give a padding of 10 pixels, a border radius to round it off of 10 pixels. Let's go with display flex. And I'm going to go with flex direction column to make sure that everything's stacked over each other. So at the moment it should like this. And now let's style the button too. So let's grab the button that lives inside the modal. And I'm just going to make sure that the width is 100%. The padding is 20 pixels and border is going to be none. And now if we actually make it active, so if we click on it, I'm just going to change the background color. So let's go background color and then FAFC. So that is much more, I think, what it should look like. I'm happier with that. Cool. I'm just going to change the X text icon. So choose one of these instead, just to make it look that little bit cooler. So let's go with maybe this one instead. And on the modal, I'm just going to replace that like so. Okay, so that is better. Okay, so let's try again. Great. Let's also maybe make this background color white as well. So I'm happy with how this is looking. I'm just going to maybe go with cursor pointer for this, just to make it obvious that we can click on this. The next thing we want to do is generate images based on this one, right? However, we want to set some error messages just to let us know that this image is not the right size. So let's do that next. So on the modal itself, we are going to save the errors. And when do we want an error to happen? Well, I think let's also have another button here, as we want to check the size first. So when we click generate, we don't actually want to generate. We're going to add an on click to check size. Okay, so let's define this check size. Const check size equals. And then I am going to essentially use ref. So let's import use ref from React. So this means I need to initialize it, const ref equals use ref, and then I'm just going to pass through null, and we're going to do so on the image itself. So ref equals ref. This is essentially the component that we care about because we're going to get its size. Okay, and to do that, when we click check size, we're essentially going to say that if ref current width, we're getting its current width, and if it equals 256, and if ref current height equals 256, then we're fine, then we're good to go. Then we can essentially write a function to generate variations. Okay, we're good to go on that. Otherwise, if it is not, well, then we've got an error, and I'm just going to use set error to set the error of error. Choose 256 by 256 image, just to be safe. Okay, so now we're setting an error, and essentially we want to display that error, right? So let's say that if error exists, then we want to, or actually let's have some text here anyway. So I'm just going to have as a default some text that says image must be 256 by 256. However, if an error exists, I want to override that. So if error exists, show that. Otherwise, show that string. Okay? Cool. Make sure that's in curly braces so it gets picked up as code. Okay, so now if there is essentially no error, then show this button. However, if there is an error, then we show this button instead. So, and that says, close this and try again. Okay, so, and then on click of this, we can just, you guessed it, close the modal. So we're reusing that function, close modal. Wonderful. So now let's try upload something else, right? So upload an image. I'm going to go with this super long one. It's very large. Maybe let's actually control how these images are viewed, right? So I'm also going to say that the image container that holds our image is going to have a height of 256 pixels. Let's put that inside. And a width of 256 pixels. And then I'm also just going to do overflow hidden. So it's really obvious that the image is too big because it will look like this. It will look all cut off. And if I hit generate, it says error, choose 256 by 256 image. Close this and try again. How cool is that? I'm pretty proud with what I built here. And then we can choose an image that is 256 by 256 pixels and we can generate. Okay, so cool. Let's actually work on writing the generate function next. So we've defined the generate function here, generate variations. However, we haven't actually done it here. So let's go ahead and do that. So for this, what I'm going to do is go back to the server and define a route. So let's do it. So as we saw, that file, console request file, is being saved here. This is the whole file essentially, right? That's how we're getting the file name from it. We need to get its path. Okay, so I'm going to get its .path and I'm actually going to save this as something. So I'm going to save it up here maybe. Yep, sure. So let's go with let file path. At the moment it'll be nothing, but as soon as we have a value for it, so as soon as this runs, I want to get request file path and save it to file path so that we can use it in our next route, which is going to be a post request. And let's define this. Let's call this variations. You can call it whatever you want. And we're going to pass through the request and the response. And this, again, let's have a look at OpenAI for this. So let's look at the documentation. Well, we're obviously going to make a request to this URL. So we can just take all of this. So copy it, make sure you're Node.js and copy all of this. This will create an image variation. Let's go back in here and let's go ahead and use try and catch again. So try, I'm going to paste that in like so. We don't need this as we've already done that. And we've already defined OpenAI. So we just need the response. We have the await keyword there. So we need to make this an async function. And now let's catch any errors. So try and then catch error, console error, the error. Okay, so that's what we have done. And now we can get that response and we're just going to send send response and the object. So response data comes back as this. So we need to do .data again. So response data is what we need to write. Great. However, we know that we don't want to pass through this string. What we want to pass through is the file path that we saved up here, right? So the file path that we got here, when we upload the images, we got the file path, which is essentially the file path to any one of these files, the last one we uploaded. And then we're just going to pass that through like so. Okay, so wonderful. And we are hard coding this. Let's get back 10 images, all at this size. And once that comes back to us, so back in here, let's get the response. So let's actually hook this up to our front end next. So const generate variations equals, and then all I'm going to do is try and catch again. So try and let's catch any errors. So catch error, console error, and we are going to try, well, we're going to use await fetch, and we're going to go to localhost 8000 / variations this time, right? So make sure that is in a string, and then we're going to also pass through the options, which we are going to define. So const options, well, we know this is a post request, so options method, it's a string of post, and we actually don't need anything else. So let's just get the response of this. So response, And then we're going to get the response. Don't forget to make this an async function. Let's get the response, get its JSON, and this is, again, async, so we use the await keyword, and let's get its data. And then I'm just going to essentially console log the data so we can see it, but I know it's going to be an array of images, so I can just set images to be the data. And once we are done, I'm just going to set error as null if there are any errors. And I'm also going to set modal open as false, so it shuts the modal. Okay? Great. So when do we want to generate these variations? Well, we want to generate them after we check the size, right? So I'm going to go back to the modal here. I'm going to pass through generate variations, just like so. Let's maybe put these on a new line so you can see everything that we're passing through into this wonderful modal. So generate variations. I've obviously misspelt it. Generate variations. Okay, so that's better. And now on the modal, let's just copy it so I don't make any spelling mistakes. Let's pass it through here as well. And now let's essentially call it. Okay? Before we move on, I am just going to also just set the images to null so we can start fresh. And if selected image equals null, okay, when we try to generate the images, I just want to set an error message and just say that no image has been selected so that we can't generate anything. You can pass through whatever you want. This is the string that I am choosing to pass through so that it shows up. And finally, we're just going to close the modal. So I'm just going to use set modal and pass through false and return out of this so that we don't go to the next thing. And lastly, just so that we don't have any issues when uploading an image again, so the same image again, I'm just going to clear the files we selected. And we can do so right after we set the selected image, I'm just going to get eTarget value and set it to null. Great. So let's give it a whirl. So let's go back here, upload an image. Let's upload this image that meets the requirements and generate. And now let's wait. So once I've done this thing, it should shut this modal, it should get rid of any error messages, and it should show 10 variations of this image that I uploaded, which is pretty awesome, let's be honest. And there we go. We can see those 10 images and those 10 URLs and 10 variations of me. How cool is that? I mean, some of them are like super scary, but at least we have managed to do it. I really enjoyed showing you this tutorial. It was really fun to make. It's been the funnest one I made in a while. So I hope you had fun. Thanks so much again, and don't forget to clean up your code, get rid of, like we used RGB and hex, and we also used variations of different quote marks, and we haven't formatted the code, so please go ahead and do that, and take this project, make it your own, style it up. There is so much to do. It is yours. And then we can clear again.